Is your programming more stale than your favorite breakfast cereal that you forgot to close up in the pantry? Ah, bummer. Well, in this video, I'm going to help you freshen up your workouts by teaching you how to create a functional training program. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can get notified every time we post new videos about programming, functional training, assessing your client's pains, and other movement training related topics. So, I've used the following 5 steps I'm about to cover for the past 10 plus years to keep my training sessions fresh and fun while effectively progressing hundreds of clients towards their goals. But I want to break down a few kind of FAQs first. When we're talking about functional training, what does the term functional mean? Well, for me, it means essentially that. It's applicable towards what you want. It's authentic. It's dialed in to the goal, and the process of that goal literally hits that point every single time. It's if I want to go swim, I'm going to swim. Very functional. If I want to start writing a book, I'm going to sit down and literally start clacking away on a keyboard. So that's what functional means. So what does functional programming mean? Well, it's simply kind of that, right? We need to design our program to match the needs and wants of the client or athlete in front of us. So if they want to go bench press and get a higher PR for bench press, we probably should be practicing things that resemble bench press. If someone wants to go be better at playing on a park because their kids go there all the time, well, our programming should probably match what a park forces them to go do. Again, it sounds very simple, but I would say that functional training is for everybody. And if you're a trainer not providing functional training for your athlete or client, I say, gosh, you may be wasting their time a little bit. Well, all right, Michael, well, my client wants to look good naked and wants to be able to walk down the beach with pride and confidence. Awesome. Then do functional training for that. And again, that's what probably most of the industry is doing, actually. They're actually training for more physique type of outcomes, though their clients want to play better pickleball or want to go to and play, get on the wakeboard or the snowboard, or want to be able to actually just throw the baseball around with their grandchildren. But we're training them just to be stronger at machine type lifts. Just a little consideration, a slight tangent. Let's get on with the show. So, how do you start to write a functional workout? Well, step 1, you got to know your client's goals. Most important thing, as we're talking about, you got to know deep down what their wants are, and then we have to break down and assess what their needs are. So, some of their wants, right? 15 minutes, 10 minutes, first session, or at least a constant conversation as you're programming and your sessions go with that client should always be assessing goals, because goals do change. In fact, they change often, and we need to be on the top tier understanding of what those things are so we can be ready to make program adjustments, because what the body does is what the body gets better at. So if it's too random, if it just kind of changes all the time, well, we're not really going to hit a result too quickly. So we need to be able to manage that. And I talked about the wants, right? That really goes after their wants. Well, step 2 is really conducting a movement assessment. Well, and that really goes after their needs. And a movement assessment is so critical because if we don't know where their body is, where their ankle is, where their knee is, how their neck and shoulder work in terms of rotating because they want to play a racket sport better. If we don't know the state of is or of start, then it's going to be very, very hard for us to write a program because we'll essentially just be guessing or hoping that what we wrote down before the session starts literally applies. And if it doesn't apply, then we're thinking on our feet, which is not a bad thing because we need to do that often, but we may be scrambling and giving a second or third rate drill when really if we sat down for a little longer to think about it, we would have given them the right drill at the right time. And a movement assessment should do one thing. It should always start with what they can do. I don't want to do a movement assessment that only tells me what they can't do. What does that really help me to do when I finally put pen to paper? I'm still guessing on what they can do. I need to do a movement assessment that says, ooh, I understand where their starting point of success is. Because with that, and with only that, you can finally say, boom, this drill is a great start for them. So really think about that. And I'll be kind of showing you and talking to you about ways to think about a movement assessment a little bit later in this video. And in fact, if you want to follow along with me for the next 3 steps, pause this video real quick, go to the link in the description down below where we have a free functional training program template that you can download. Then we can reference it together because it's going to get detailed. In fact, good programming is not simple. It's quite complicated, but we're going to do our very best to break it down into chunks and pieces so you can say, oh, I see how this step fits into this step, very much like a puzzle. So, step 3. We got to think about what movements are related to those goals. Now remember, there's 2 types of goals, right? There's a want goal, and they tell us those things, but then there's a need goal. And those need goals are not necessarily more important than the wants, because we're not just talking about a robot here. We're talking about someone who has emotions and feelings and desires, and they need to keep that motivation high to keep coming back to train and condition. So if you think about the movements that they need to do, right, so an example is, okay, let's say they want to do triathlons, or another example is they want to do gardening, or maybe another example is they want to do bench press, right? Kind of cut all the ways of thinking about it, right? So if they want to do from physique building, bench press, to activities of daily living, gardening, to a sport, triathlon, we need to, again, start with what can they do already, because we have to start there. And we have to think about what are the movements that go with those global patterns. So there's a lot of things to consider, and we'll go into those in a little bit. But okay, triathlon, well, that's really 3 things. That's really running, biking, and swimming, okay? Not in that order. And then gardening. Gosh, what's gardening? Well, I like to think about gardening. Okay, well, I may be down low. I may be underneath bushes. I may be shoveling. I may be grabbing a bag and throwing things around. But I'm definitely going to be kind of all over the place. I'll be high, I'll be low. I'll be reaching this way, I'll be reaching that way. It's like, okay, wait a minute. Gardening's pretty complicated. That's a pretty complicated sport. Okay, what about a bench press? I want to go do a PR in bench press. Well, that's actually very, very simple. I'm laying on my back. I got to push a bar or dumbbells away from me in a straight line. Okay, actually, that's pretty simple to kind of consider what all the patterns are. But step 3, what movements are related to those goals? And then step 4 is breaking down those movements into trainable exercises. Because it's not just about doing more bench press to get better at bench press. You're going to essentially burn out the systems that make that possible. It's not just about getting in a pool and swimming more to be better at swimming. Yes, it's very important to do those things, but again, we can't always be in a pool. We can't always be in a bench press setting. So what do? We break it into other trainable exercises that are functional, closely related to that task, that get us closer to it without actually doing it. Because typically we overtrain if we just do the same thing over and over again. Runners are a huge example of this. Most runners run too much, and they don't apply the other functional subsets of running into their training and conditioning program, and they overdo it. So again, this would be a great time to reference your programming template that you just downloaded, as I'm going to go over some of the primary and secondary considerations for breaking down movements into their parts or their trainable exercises. So let's jump into the primary things that I think you really have to start with. Got to start with the big picture. And those are the physiological strategies that really kind of set up how the body biologically works. So the more we understand the physiological abilities of our body, right? Building strength, building speed, building endurance and coordination and agility and power, right? We understand, like, how does the body actually do that? Like, what are the mechanisms that actually produce that result? Well, in our first primary strategy, we have to think about, okay, well, what is the goal requiring? Well, if it's requiring bench press PR, well, it's certainly going to require more strength. But it's not going to require much agility at all, actually. So we can probably kind of push those different drills or different ways of thinking off to the side. If it's thinking about triathlon, gosh, well, that definitely produces power, definitely produces endurance, definitely produces some sort of agility, like in the water. Last time I did a triathlon, like, people were all over me. I definitely had to be able to be agile and set myself up for success for air so I don't get swam over. Definitely happened. Okay, so what about gardening? I'm definitely going to have endurance, because typically garden is a several hour type of event. It's not very, very quick. All right. What about gardening in terms of, well, wait a minute. What about the fundamentals? What about the fundamental, what physiological strategies produce just fundamental movement patterns? Oh, like being on the ground, like maybe even planking and crawling, because that's where you can be often. It's like, oh, wait, okay, so there's a lot of things to consider about what does the body need from a biological standpoint to produce the results. That's a big topic. It's a big topic, but that's kind of where we need to start. Another place we need to kind of think about is what fundamental positions are they in? And we did reference that a little bit, but we're going to go deeper. Okay, so where am I in a pool? What position am I in? Well, you're actually prone if you're going to do freestyle swimming. Okay, in a bike, well, I'm actually seated and heavily flexed forward if I'm in a triathlon. Okay, what about running? Well, I'm actually upright on that one. I'm actually upright on 2 feet, so I probably need to train, definitely got to train prone, definitely got to train seated, definitely got to train standing upright. Well, gardening, how are you going to train those things? What fundamental positions are you in? Almost pretty much all of them, in a sense, right? There are some that are maybe a little bit harder to get into, but I'm going to be kneeling, be sitting, I'm going to be laying down, potentially. I may even be hanging off something, depending on what branch I need to get after. That would be pretty intense gardening. Okay, and what about for, let's say, bench press? Well, you're pretty much in the same position every single time for bench press, but that doesn't mean you should train that way every single time. But I'm definitely going to be supine on that bench. But you can still train upright if you're on some cables. All right, what about the actions that you're going to be considering for those kind of primary strategies? Well, if you follow this template, you're going to see there's quite a few of them, and we break them down to the fundamentals, right? So if I'm running, isn't running basically a type of a lunge? And I would say, yeah, it is. Isn't running kind of like balancing? Yeah, it kind of is. So we got to think about, should I be considering those global movement patterns or those actions in my training and conditioning as I start to actually put pen to paper? Now, to not spend too much time on those, because you can see those on the list, but I want to go down to this last one here. It's the challenge level, because we tend to overdo this one. There's really 2 considerations that we think about. Is it simple or is it complicated? Is the drill multiple different things put together to create one drill, or is it simply just a squat? Is it grabbing onto a mace and doing a whole mace flow of spins and flips? Is that something that's going to be very functional for that person's outcome? Or is that too complex too soon? And in terms of the training and conditioning world, with a lot of functional trainers, I think we get too complex too soon because we want to impress. We want to not make it boring for even ourselves. But we have to remember that where's this person starting from? Where is their success? And what can they do first? So most of the programming in the beginning should be very simple drills, and then we start to sprinkle in the complexity as their body can appropriately manage putting multiple joint sequences and planes of motion sequences together into one cohesive, sequence. So don't overdo that one too soon. What about the secondary considerations, right? These are important, but really not as important as what we've first talked about. So we have to talk about what we call the X, Y, and Z axes, right? Or our motion angulations, verticals, or horizontals, right? How much am I actually changing my positioning of my body? Well, traditional training and conditioning hits the sagittal plane hard, very forward and back, very up and down, which works very well on a bike, very forward and back, very up and down. But that doesn't work very well for running. Though we are moving forward typically when we run, but running is literally a dance. I have to say that. It's a dance of the pelvis spinning and of the thoracic spine spinning. It's huge rotational forces producing forward motion. And a lot of runners don't know that. They don't train rotation very, very much, even though that's the primary action that produces that leg reaching forward. Maybe a deep dive we can cover later. And then the horizontals, or the ranges of motion. If I'm gardening, I'm going to be in close a lot. I'm going to be down low, kind of in tight, maybe reaching here a little bit. I'm not going to be doing massive big swoops, with a viper overhead. Or am I, because I'm trimming a huge hedge? So it's like, oh wow, there's a lot of maybe even contradictions to what I just said, because it depends on the functionality of what's in front of us. So you can see how it really comes back to what's functional. Well, gardening could be a huge range of motion, but typically it may be very, very tight. So we have to take all those things into consideration. Then not to rush through these last three, but what body area are we working on? Is it full body, upper body, lower body? What's the rate? Am I always putting them on a clock for 1 minute, even though the triathlon's going to be, well, for hours? So, okay, we have to make sure that our timing is appropriate. Am I always saying, hey, do 10 of this, 15 of that? When in reality, we just need to say, go until you fatigue. Not fail necessarily, but when your body starts to say, I'm getting tired of doing that. So we have to understand that our time, our rate, our reps all matter. All matter. So as we continue to dive into this one, I want to finish our last step on, after all that we've been said, after all that we've talked about, is the workout a strength workout or a cardio workout? And that may seem like a really interesting place to stop, but I think it's one of the most important things that we have to consider as a trainer writing a functional training program, is what does the client basically understand so their body can mentally and physically adapt to these different situations that you're going to be putting them in. Now, we have a lot of terms for these terms, or for strength, and we certainly have a few that are more popular, right? Like an AMRAP or a Metcon, right? Again, we try not to use those terms because they don't know what that means. They know strength or they know cardio. And also their body's going to adapt to a similar training environment quicker the more we can say on track. Again, not saying this purely that it all has to be all strength related or cardio related, but at least has to have a vast majority per workout to make our adaptations sing or connect more. Because it's not just about the adaptations that matter. It's about them mentally feeling that a result is coming through. And for always jumping, if our training is too random, if it doesn't centralize enough for long enough, you're training for randomness. Now, randomness doesn't really have much takeaway. There's no really objectiveness in randomness, right? So we have to understand that if we give a cardio workout, keep it relatively mostly cardio so their body can adapt to that training. And then if it's strength, keep it mostly strength. It doesn't have to be every single workout, right? You can change it up, but try to keep their body from getting too confused. And that's really important, not only for their physical, but also for their mental, and tie it into those pieces. So that's the last step. That's the final piece to it. And if you want to learn more about how to program functionally so you can keep your training sessions fun and actually make changes for your clients, please check out the multidimensional movement coaching mentorship in this description that's linked below. This is where we mentor coaches on how to think, not just what to think, about the principles of movement science and its functional applications within the fitness industry. And if you've learned at least one thing and enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out some of our other content in our videos. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. We'll definitely see you next time.